Hey guys, I'm here to talk about the topic that is on my latest post, boundaries, specifically as they are referring to a topic called sexual agency. So I'm going to type that in here. There we go. Hello. Okay, so let's just get right into it. I got a couple of really good questions that I'd love to answer for you. But first, let's, I guess, talk about like what the heck is sexual agency. Here's the thing. There are a lot of people who come to me, not a lot of people, but this is like a pretty common thing that I hear from people when it comes to relationships is the topic of like intimacy and sometimes how that line of is this okay and is this not okay can be crossed within a romantic relationship. I think that there are certain situations where we feel we do not possess sexual agency over ourselves. So sexual agency meaning the ability to define yourself sexually, whether it means anywhere along the spectrum of heterosexual to homosexual, or even along the spectrum of highly interested in sex or asexual, right? But it also has to do with, I think, how much or how little we want to express ourselves sexually. I think that in this on like social media, maybe in this day and age, there's a lot of like sexual liberation that's beginning to happen, and maybe that's been going on for a while, but at least as far as I'm aware, just the idea of like female empowerment, sex is something that is brought up. And so when talking about sexual agency, sometimes for me, I feel like I can get a little bit, I can feel a little bit like I don't actually know how to talk about sex without it being over sexualized, right? And I think that I'm all for anybody who wants to express themselves anywhere along that spectrum. But for me, I guess I fall in along somewhere of like more private about that world. But I think it's definitely something that I feel deserves to be talked about. And I think that there is a fear around talking about it, which causes a lot of disconnections within relationships. So here's a couple of questions that you could maybe ask yourself if you are thinking that maybe you're having a hard time expressing yourself with your partner when it comes to sex. So let's see. Can you express yourself as far as like what it is that you're wanting with your partner or not wanting? Do you feel like sometimes you make allowances based on someone else's sexual desires at the expense of what your own wants and needs are? Maybe do you feel empowered when it comes to sex? Or do you feel like you're just kind of at the whim of somebody else's wants and needs, right? So these are some things that you can ask yourself that may shine a light into how much sexual agency you have. Some questions I got that are really great that I really want to answer for you guys are, let's see. In a world that says being in a relationship means that you must come together as one, are you still allowed sexual agency? This is pretty big because the clients that come to me who actually are experiencing more of these problems are clients who are in committed relationships or marriages, who are saying like, I'm in this unified relationship. Does that mean that I have to give up the things that I need and want in order to have this be a unified relationship? And my answer for that is you always sexual agency is individualized. I think you should always feel like you have the ability to state what it is that you're wanting or not wanting, without expectation, right? I think that it's a boundary. It's a physical boundary. It's an emotional boundary. It's, it's saying like, hey, I don't feel connected anymore, or hey, I don't want to engage with you right now, or whatever it may be. It's being able to fully express that, no matter the context of the relationship. And I think when you're in when you're in a partnership, a committed partnership, or even a non-committed partnership, when you're in partnership with anyone, I think that sometimes there's a fear around showing up authentically as far as our sexuality goes, because we think that someone might judge us, or we think they might leave, or we think that will be too much or too little, right? There's this fear of being abandoned or being, not good enough. So we start to edit ourselves sexually in order to keep those people around, which is not healthy, but it is common. And I think when these lines begin to be crossed, either way, I think that we begin to lose connection because we've lost connection with ourselves and our own sexual agency. And so relationships crumble, and we wonder why, and we blame it on, a number of different things, where in reality, we're not holding true to our sexual agency because for some reason we didn't think that we were entitled to that, right? So that's one question. I hope that answers that. Let's see. The next question is, if you already feel you have lost sexual agency in your life or in your relationships, how can you get it back? So there's many people that feel like they've crossed a boundary has been crossed in their lives sexually, that maybe they don't feel that they have the ability to reclaim their own sexual agency and be able to say like, this is what I want and not want, right? And to have that boundary around sex. And so this question, or at least how I'm understanding it, is yes, if you've lost anything, you have, I guess maybe not anything. I feel like though if you've lost most things, like there's always the possibility, potential of getting it back. I don't think it's ever one and done. I don't think that you can ever rewind any of this stuff, but I think that you 100% can come back to that sense of empowerment in any area of your life and say like, what, at one point I've lost that, but now I'm regaining it back. I'm claiming that for myself. And I think that maybe if that has been lost, the need to reclaim that is even more powerful because of the effects that it can have on your self-esteem. When we sort of give up, or not give up, but when we have these boundaries crossed, sometimes we feel like, maybe we don't have what it is. We don't have what it takes to have those boundaries around things like sex, or around things like money, or around things like our emotions, or around things like physical space, right? And we tend to beat ourselves up as far as like self-esteem goes, of like, maybe I'm just not worthy of having control over what it is I say is and isn't okay. And that's not the case. Let's see, what is this question? Did you feel you've ever lost yours? If so, how do you get yours back? That's a great question, and that was actually one of the questions I was going to answer too. So let's go with that. Yes, I have felt like I've lost mine before, and it was within a committed relationship, and I felt like I didn't have the right to draw it because I was in a committed relationship that I agreed to. And so I thought that somehow that gave an all access pass, even if it wasn't something that I wanted. And I felt extremely disempowered. I felt extremely unworthy. I felt like maybe this is just how life is. Maybe this is just what everyone thinks, and like, who am I to complain about this? This is a committed relationship that I'm in, right? Who's gonna listen to me as if I say like this was a line that was crossed and it's serious for me, and I'm feeling really depressed about it. So yes, I have felt that way before in relationship, and probably in a few other ways too, but that's the one that I can think of that stands out the most. And your second question is, if so, how'd you get yours back? Well, I left that relationship, and I have a very strong understanding of my body and the fact that it is mine and it doesn't belong to anyone else, even if I'm in a relationship with them. We all have the rights to protect ourselves and to say like, this is or isn't what I want, even when it comes to something like sex, which isn't necessarily seen as like a huge boundary right away in relationships, right? But it definitely is. And it's something that should not be taken very lightly, I don't think, because this is something that in relationships, in romantic relationships, we specifically exchange that with our partner. And so having sexual agency for each person is very, very important to maintain the health of not only our bodies, but also our mental and emotional state. What about Tantra, money, and enlightenment? I don't really know much about Tantra, so I'm not going to dive into that. I'm sure there's a lot of people who know much more than me. Money, yes, money and having agency over that and being able to say, like, I don't want to lend you this money. I don't want to spend it on that. I do. Being able to have the ability to define what it is that is healthy for you going in and out money-wise, I think is having like monetary agency maybe. I don't know if that's the right word, or monetary autonomy. I think it all has to do with boundaries though. And I think that being able to draw those boundaries around things like money are also extremely important. There's a lot of people, a lot of different situations where we can be taken advantage of in those ways. And just because we've been taken advantage of before doesn't necessarily mean that like, oh, from here on out, I'm just the person who has no boundaries around my money or has no boundaries around sex, right? There's always an opportunity to reclaim that for ourselves. Hope that answers that question a little bit. Enlightenment, I guess I would understand that as like spirituality. And I think spiritual agency, same thing. We can all, say, these are my beliefs. These are the things that that feel right for me, and I have a boundary around that in a way, and I'm willing to be able to have dialogue with you about things. But you cannot tell me that you have more ownership over my spirituality than I do, right? And you cannot tell me that you have more ownership over my body than I do, or over my money than I do, right? I think that there's always like a level of agency that we can have around these things. What do you think the most common cause of one losing their SA? Oh, it's like, what's SA? Sexual agency. Okay. The most common cause, I think, is, I read some research papers on this, and what was discovered was that our very first sexual experience has a lot to do with the way that we view our own sexual agency. So if it was something that we were pressured into, if it was something that we really wanted, if it was something that we felt like we had to like achieve, right? This is something that plays a huge role in the way that we understand our sexual agency as teenagers and into adulthood. So thinking back to your first experience, that actually tends to have just the biggest impact. Same thing, with relationships. When you think of like what has the most impact on the way we navigate relationships, it's most often our very first relationship, which is with our parents, right? So you'll many times talk about the relationship you have with your parents when you're talking about your own like personal relationship problems or dynamics. Same thing with sexual agency is that very first sexual encounter. How did that unfold? And that can create a seed, which becomes a story in your head of like, this is how it's always going to be, or this is how I must behave, or this is how I, whatever it may be. So I hope that answers that question. And I think, I don't know if that's like the most common cause, but that's definitely, that tiny seed that gets planted in the beginning that sort of results in us sort of abandoning ourselves in that area. Good questions, by the way. I have one last question. Where is it? Actually, I have two questions. What are some common concerns as a relationship expert that you find yourself addressing as a relationship coach? Common concerns are basically, am I not good enough for my partner? Is a big one. And it's hard to not be in this world of intimate relationship and be getting feedback that you aren't enough for them, and to not internalize that, right? And I think that in relationships, many of us want to work things out, right? We want to look at ourselves and say, like, what am I doing? How can I be better? How can I be more? How can I be less? Right? And I think, this is tricky because there are so many different layers to different couples and different people that I've talked to. So it really, really varies. But I think the most common concern is like, am I not enough? Am I not enough for my partner? And maybe if I'm not enough for them, maybe I can go find someone else that will think I'm enough. And it often leads to like infidelity or just giving up on the relationship altogether, rather than having the space to actually actually express what it is that we're wanting. So obviously you have to also have somebody who's willing to listen to that and who has their own sense of sexual agency as well, and without expectation. And the final question is, I hope that made sense. In the age of the Me Too and numerous sexual misconduct cases, what does sexual agency look like for women and men? This is really tough because I've seen how powerful the Me Too movement has been, and I've also seen people take advantage of this and villainize people who maybe aren't necessarily villains. And I think I've also seen people being shamed for not wanting to fully express themselves in that way. And I've also seen people be shamed for expressing themselves fully. So I think if I can boil it down, what does it look like in this day and age, right, for men and women? I think it looks like us realizing that the the responsibility that you have is in for yourself alone, right? It's for making sure that you are speaking up for what it is that you want and don't want, and that you are within your rights to do so, and that your partner is also within their rights to do so as well. I think that acting on what it is that you want without the consent of your partner and without hearing their sexual agency, I think is not okay. It's not healthy. It's the opposite of what I'm saying. And so really being able to have an open dialogue about like what you want and what you don't want, and then not shaming your partner for what is expressed, right? If they want to say, you know, this is what I'm feeling and wanting right now, or not wanting, I think coming from a place of compassion and non-judgment and acceptance, and saying you are it's totally normal to express those things that you want, and this is what I want, and maybe we can like have a dialogue about that, but having no expectations for what someone else's sexual agency looks like and how it compares to your own, I think is a really healthy place to come from. So if you have any other questions for me, I would love to answer them. And, you know, I hope that you are all feeling empowered within your relationship, or even if you're not in a relationship, to express yourself the way that is true for you. And you're not sort of sacrificing your own wants and needs in order to fit into someone else's box. So that's all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you're having a great Monday.